Hello, and welcome to the Outlaws podcast with Kate and Shayla for professionals unlearning the rules of work and life, ditch the shoulds, and build what fits.
Today we're doing an Outlaws Diary episode with someone who spent most of her working life inside systems that really don't love being questioned. The military, the law, the government. And yet she's pushed back, spoken up, and refused to just go along with it.
So we're talking with Rabia Siddique. Rabia's had an incredibly varied career: human rights work, criminal law, the army, where she was involved in a terrifying hostage situation, and now speaking and consulting. And today we want to talk to her about the times she's challenged decisions that didn't sit right with her. The times she held her ground in places where she was expected to follow the well-embedded rules. The times she chose breaking rules over comfort, even when it came with consequences.
And please do note that some of the topics that Rabia talks about today might be difficult for some listeners, so please use your discretion. Rabia, thanks so much for joining us today. We're so excited to have you.
I am thrilled to be with the Outlaws. I follow you all the time, so to be on is a real delight. Thank you both.
Let's delve into your history a bit, but I suppose what I'd really like to know the answer to is, for anyone who hasn't met you before or hasn't read your book or doesn't know too much about you, how do you introduce yourself?
I guess the easiest way to introduce myself is that I'm an international criminal and human rights lawyer turned humanitarian, speaker, author, who's kind of spent my professional life trying to build or rebuild trust and justice where both of them have been broken. But I guess when it all comes down to it, I'm really just someone who believes that courage and compassion can change systems and stories and lives. And that has to start with our own.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
So what is it? I'm sure there is no typical day, Rabia, but what would you say a typical day is like for you, or maybe a typical week or a month or whatever time frame you need to get some measure
To average out life.
Yeah.
Well, I think you touched upon it beautifully at the beginning of the question, which is that for me, life, career, home life is so diverse. And that's what I love about being an outlaw, that no 2 days are the same, no 2 weeks are the same. But if I was to sort of put it all together into a collection of what, say, a week or a month looks like, for me, I guess I walk in a number of worlds and I play in a number of pools professionally. So there's still the law and the legal practice. So I still play a role in terms of, I guess, an advisory role in areas relating to human rights and equal opportunities. And I do take on key cases, maybe 1 or 2 big cases a year. So there's that sort of advisory and that human rights lawyer life that I'm still involved in, but on my terms of my choosing.
So does that something that's based locally, or is that an international?
So at the local level, I am the Deputy Chair for the Human Rights and Equal Opportunities Advisory Committee for the profession. So that involves advising on policy, legislative reform, and also profession-wide issues. At the national level, I'm also on the drafting advisory group for the Human Rights Act. And at the international level, it's advising or being lead counsel on cases, international cases that usually involve an element of human rights abuses, some war crimes or hate crimes. So where, for example, these abuses originate in countries where there's been government or authority cover-up. So, I guess local, national and international. And then the other part is the work that I do under my consultancy, under the 2 businesses that I have. And that basically comes down to a focus on helping leaders and organizations rebuild trust and safety and positive cultures in their workplaces, in their teams, in their leadership, and whether that's through speaking and keynote presentations, masterclasses or workshops. It takes different forms. And then the other arm of my consultancy is coaching, one-on-one and small group coaching. I do executive leadership coaching and speaker and storytelling coaching for people aspiring to be better storytellers and even aspiring to be professional and proficient speakers. And I do some media commentary in the areas of my professional expertise. And then some, like a lot of people, there's the whole heart piece, which is the giving back. So whether that's having the honour to be an ambassador for a number of charities and not-for-profits that are close to my heart, or the philanthropic work that I do as a not-for-profit board member. And then there's the small matter of the fact that I'm a single mum raising 17-year-old triplet boys. So that takes up a fair bit of time as well.
That's the only tricky bit.
The triplets. I knew you had triplets.
Everything else pales into insignificance.
Yeah.
It's the raising triplet teenage boys that is the biggest challenge and biggest joy.
Yeah, right. So tell us.
Quite a full load. That's quite a full load, Rabia.
Well, it's not all in one day, Kate.
No.
We're averaging out this over a week or a month, right?
So a really varied and interesting career, lots of areas of influence and interest. And how did you get from law school to where you are now?
Well, I guess it started out, first of all, in Australia. I always knew that I wanted to practice in the area of human rights, and I was really fortunate to start my career as a young lawyer at Legal Aid, where I had the opportunity to work with some amazing communities, asylum seekers and refugees, victims of family and domestic and sexual violence, regional, remote and Indigenous communities. And that really sowed the seed for my passion around human rights and also at the time criminal law.
Can I interrupt and ask, tell me what it is that you said, always wanted to practice in that area. Can you tell us a little bit about why? Do you have a sense of why you're so drawn to it?
Yeah, totally. I think it has to start with my childhood and the life-changing, life-shaping experiences I had in my formative years. So for me, being the eldest child of a migrant family, my father is an Indian Muslim. We came to Australia in the mid-1970s when white Australia policy was still very much alive. And I guess initially seeing the world through my mum and dad's eyes, who were, I guess, the daily victims of discrimination, racism, ignorance, and then going through my own personal injustice. And that started at the age of 9.5, being the victim of sexual abuse and feeling that sense of being silenced, being gagged, being invisible, being powerless over my life, and also very much being an other, where it took years and years and years to be embraced and accepted into the community, and even more years to feel a sense of belonging and real sense of identity. And that really shaped my passion for social justice.
Yeah.
To help others find their voice and not feel this sense of hopelessness and powerlessness over their lives. Yeah. So, early life in UA, Legal Aid. Then quite early on in my career, I was headhunted for a role as a federal prosecutor, which going from criminal defence and human rights work to getting an understanding of what it meant to prosecute offences and really what it meant to be an officer of the court, which required a very different set of legal skills and gave me a different perspective, because then I was working alongside, law enforcement agencies and seeing the other aspect of injustice, I guess.
Was that a difficult transition? Because those of us that have worked in kind of, defence, defence of clients, obviously there's a lot of people that go over and do work for the prosecution, and we always say they're going over to the dark side. Or
exactly.
Oh,
yes, I got a lot of that. You're a traitor, you've gone to the dark side, you're poacher come gamekeeper.
So how did you find the transition? Did you enjoy the work?
I think initially, culturally, it took some transition because criminal defence world, you're a tight-knit community. Everyone knows everyone. There's a high degree of collegiality. So I think it took me a while to shake off almost the guilt of crossing the tracks. But I had the advantage of still being quite a junior lawyer. So I hadn't been conditioned as deeply, I guess. I think for me and overall for my later legal practice, it gave me complementary skills.
Yeah.
To be able to prosecute trials as well as defend them does require a different set of skills. There are still advocacy skills and the art of persuasion that are required for both, but you play a very different role in the courtroom. And I think for me also, having then prosecuted after a few years of defence gave me a true understanding of what justice really looked like and felt like, having served on both sides.
Right.
Then later, when I left Australia, I continued work as a criminal lawyer and then a human rights lawyer, working with war crimes, terrorism, hostage cases, and then very unexpectedly, I decided to commission into the British Army. And that was a means to an end. That was basically because at the time, my calling, my passion was to work in the area of international humanitarian law. And I had been doing voluntary work. I had done some work with the International Red Cross and the UN, but I experienced them to be very large bureaucracies where it was very difficult to do the work that I wanted to do, which was very much grassroots, on the front line, working with people. And so I made a decision when I had left Australia and I was now living in the UK that I was going to leverage this vehicle of the military to become a legal officer in the British military, because I knew that as a legal officer in the army, I would have the opportunity to deploy to theatres of conflict and war and physically be on the ground, having the opportunity to serve, work with, represent, advocate for people that were truly experiencing horrors. Yeah, so I served in the British Army. As it turned out, timing changed everything because the week that I commissioned as a legal officer turned out to be the week of 9/11. And so I spent a large part of my military career in the Middle East, a year of that serving in Iraq, where during my tour in 2005, I became involved in a hostage crisis where I was taken hostage in the line of duty. And that later resulted in me being forced to mount a discrimination case against the UK Ministry of Defence, so the British government and the armed forces. And that experience then reshaped everything for me. I guess that experience taught me that real leadership and justice starts with truth and trust. And I couldn't unsee and unknow that.
Yeah.
And so I guess a number of years later, after I had then left the forces, worked for a number of years as a Crown advocate in the counter-terrorism division in London and also in The Hague, and then eventually had my triplets, and that being the driver to return home to Australia. I guess after what I'd experienced, I realised that the trajectory that I was on was not the one that I wanted to continue down. And that led me to my significant career outlaw decision, which was to walk away from the path that had almost been written for me, which would have been to have come back, with this 13, 14 years of global experience and to have joined the bar and then perhaps to have pursued a judicial appointment. And I knew that as an older mum of little triplet babies, as someone who had this realization that the law and everything that I had worked for and within was reactionary and was the response when trust and truth had been broken. And I didn't want to just play a reactionary band-aid after the fact role anymore. I wanted to be able to serve people in a way where whatever I had learnt, whatever my gifts were, whatever my story and experiences were that I could share, I could help leaders be better leaders. I could help people advocate for themselves and maybe play a small role in preventing a lot of these crises and horrors and breaches of trust from happening in the first place, which is why I then, I guess, took a pretty sharp turn and formed my consultancy.
It's such an incredible story, and I've read your book. Kate's read your book as well, but there's obviously going to be a lot of people that haven't read your book. The hostage situation was incredible, but I think what came after was more incredible and is probably the true outlaw move, I think. Can you I know the story is long and really detailed, but can you give listeners, I suppose, just a bit of a overview of how that all played out? And I guess really, I think it took a lot of bravery for you I know it took a lot of bravery for you to go down that path of deciding to sue the British government.
That was probably my biggest outlaw moment.
Yeah. So tell us about that.
So, as I said, timing was pretty crazy for me because the week that I commissioned as a captain and the legal officer in the British Army turned out to be the week of 9/11. So, of course, the world changed in ways that we couldn't perceive at the time, and my life changed in ways that I couldn't have predicted. So that was 2001, of course. 2005, I was deployed to Iraq as the sole legal officer to support the British contingent out there. About 2/3 of the way through my tour, two of my colleagues, two British Special Forces soldiers, had been kidnapped and detained by an Iranian-backed terrorist group that were wreaking havoc in the country at the time. They were using a lot of the explosives that you may remember going off at roadsides and in civilian neighbourhoods that were killing thousands of innocent Iraqis and hundreds of military personnel that were still serving over there. So these two colleagues of mine had been kidnapped and they had been taken to a fairly infamous place, which was a police station, but it had also become the unofficial headquarters of the terrorist group. So a colleague of mine, James, had been ordered in by our commander to try and peacefully negotiate for the release of our two colleagues. And James was trained in this sort of a situation. After a couple of hours of James getting nowhere, he sent a signal back to our headquarters explaining that the Iraqi representative who was in control of the situation had asked for me because he said that I was the only one that he had worked with, that he trusted, that he felt had shown him and his community some respect and had listened and had spent the time asking how I could help them and what they needed from me, rather than what he said he and his people perceived to be the lack of trust and the lack of respect that they had experienced by the other British and American and Allied soldiers that they'd been in contact with. James, my colleague.
That in and of itself, though, is super interesting in the Middle East, isn't it? Given
yes, well, given the cultural significance of the fact that I am a woman. In fact, I was the first woman to be deployed in this role in the Iraq conflict. The fact that I have a Muslim background, that I have a recognizable Arabic Muslim name, I mean, it could have gone very much the other way.
Yeah.
And I was very conscious of the fact that I had been deliberately selected to deploy in this role. So I knew I had to embrace, interestingly, all the things that I had distanced myself from when living in Australia in order to be included and accepted and feel a sense of fitting in and belonging in Australia. I knew that I had to embrace all of these things about my culture, my religious heritage, my life, and be proud of them in order that I could then proudly own them. And I guess leverage is not the greatest word, but utilize them in order to build trusting, respectful relationships.
Yeah.
So I guess that's what I was able to do, to the extent that this male senior judge that represented the Iraqis in this hostage situation said, the only one I'll speak to is Major Rabia. which is what they called me. That in itself, though, was a hugely problematic situation because I was not trained in hostage negotiation. I was just the army lawyer. I was the lawyer in uniform.
Mm.
But the situation had then become so volatile that had they not sent me in, there was a substantial risk that our two colleagues were going to be executed. So it put our commander in a pretty unenviable position. And ultimately the decision was made.
Yeah.
Sorry?
And you in an unenviable position as well.
And me in a terrifying position.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So my commander ordered me in to deploy in on my own and to take over from James and to lead what we now understood to be hostage negotiations. And as I said, I was petrified. I had no training in hostage negotiation. I didn't have a lot of deep intelligence training that James had the advantage of being exposed to. This was not my area of expertise or comfort. But, it was one of those moments where sometimes we're forced to do the unthinkable and the uncomfortable for the greater good. And you have a split second in some of these moments in life to make the choice. What am I going to do? Am I going to face my fear and step into the discomfort? Or do I walk away? And I didn't feel at the time that I had a choice. Not only was I being ordered to go in there, but the lives of my two mates now rested on my shoulders. So I had to go into the unknown.
Yeah, incredible.
And, as you said, Shayla, it's a long story, but basically the short version is the judge and I were able to make a considerable amount of progress where we were able to, within several hours, agree a set of conditions and actions that I would take in return for him releasing the men in my custody. But literally, as we were about to sign the hostage release contract that I had been busily writing up over the hours of negotiation, all hell then broke loose outside of the police compound where we all were. And what had happened was the terrorists that had captured our two colleagues had spread a story out in the community that they knew would whip up a frenzy, and that was that they had captured and were holding Israeli spies. So whilst we were inside negotiating, a crowd of local civilians that started at about 150 or 200 when I had arrived had grown to over 2,500. And they were storming the compound, having already set fire to our colleagues, the British soldiers outside that had been sent to try and keep the crowd calm. And so literally at that critical moment, the crowd stormed the compound and all hell breaks loose. And so I'm no longer in control. James, who is still allowed to be with me, who's assisting me, he and I are then dragged down the other end of the compound and we're thrown into a cell. So we become hostages as well. And shortly after that, we're joined by 4 other British Special Forces soldiers who tried to sneak their way in to get us out, and they had been caught. So now in the second cell, there's 6 of us. And as you pointed out earlier, I'm the only woman, I'm the only Arabic speaker, I'm the only Muslim. And now at the hands of the terrorists who are holding us captive, all of those traits are turned against me. And I'm seen as the traitor, the biggest traitor of them all. And for the next 8.5 hours in that cell, in front of my 5 colleagues, I am degraded, I'm humiliated, and I'm tortured. But then miraculously, we're all rescued by the Brits and the Americans. And what should have been the end of the most hideous, horrifying experience of my life, sadly, heralded the beginning of what would then become an even bigger injustice and my biggest battle. Because the reaction that came by my superiors and the British government was almost unthinkable. All of my male colleagues, including James, were acknowledged and recognised for the role that they had played, for what they had endured. They were all provided with trauma counselling and mental health support, and James was decorated by the then Queen Elizabeth II. And at the same time, I was denied any acknowledgement or recognition for the role that I had been ordered to perform, for the mistreatment and the torture that I had endured. I was offered no trauma counselling or mental health support. And I'll never forget the day that James received his military cross was the day I received my written gag order. So I received a written order from the most senior commander of the Joint Armed Forces, ordering me to never speak of the role that I had been ordered to perform at Al Jamiat, which was the compound.
So what, I mean, I know I've read this in the book, and it is sort of unfathomable to me because it's so overt, right? But what's behind that? Do you have any insight into that? I know
I
we're
do now, Kate. I do now. I didn't at the time. At the time, I was led to believe that it was a decision by my commander out in Iraq. And that's what I was led to believe for the next couple of years, during which time I exhausted every avenue of redress and justice to try and right what I knew to be a personal wrong, injustice. You know, it was pretty clear that this was discrimination. And this was discrimination based on my sex, based on my ethnic and cultural and religious background. And I knew this to be absolutely wrong, absolutely against all the values that I lived by and that I led by. So it took me 2 years and I exhausted every internal non-adversarial avenue. And at every point, the door was slammed in my face. And like any whistleblower will tell you, a large institution, when they are held to account, they close ranks pretty effectively. And so after 2 years of exhausting every path that was available to me, the only option left then was to sue the British government and to mount this discrimination case.
So every signal then is telling you to be quiet that whole time, isn't it? You're getting every message that this is, for whatever reason, this is not something that we're going to delve into. It is suppressed.
It wasn't just a signal, Kate. I was ordered. I was ordered by 2 of my superiors in the legal corps, how's that for irony, to shut up if I wanted to salvage and retain my military career.
Yeah. That's the clearest signal. I'm drawn back to a Seinfeld episode. Not that this is really, this is the signal, Jerry. Do you remember? Episode 1 of Seinfeld. Yeah, it's pretty. It can't be any clearer to get an order like that. So
that's right. So when the army is busy closing ranks, I kept assuming this was a military decision and a military injustice. And that belief continued when I ultimately, after agonising, decided to take this pretty extreme step to sue the government and the armed forces. I later found out the real truth of what happened. So, obviously for those that are not aware of my case, I was successful, and my case led to the opening of floodgates of hundreds of similar discrimination cases within the armed forces and out of other institutions. And it also led to the change in dialogue and the culture around the role of women on the front line and as first responders. 6 months after my case, the first woman was awarded a military cross. And it also led to an independent investigation into the armed forces, which ultimately resulted then, as a flow-on consequence, some profound changes in policy, in processes, and importantly in the culture and attitudes around how women, ethnic minorities, LGBTI us, and personnel suffering from mental injuries were treated. So that was a win in the broadest sense. What I found out was a number of months after my case, I was approached by someone who took a huge risk and risked their career, someone that had worked at Whitehall, who reached out to me and said that they felt very strongly that I deserved some answers. And I met this person for coffee, and they explained to me that the day that this was all unfolding in Iraq, the then Prime Minister Tony Blair called an emergency meeting with his cabinet. They call it Cobra meetings. His cabinet, who, of course, at the time were a collection of white, middle class, middle-aged, Oxbridge-educated men. No diversity in that cabinet room. And the decision that was made in that emergency meeting was if we were all to survive that day, it must never be revealed publicly that I was called in and requested by the Iraqis to lead this, what became a pivotal event in the Iraq campaign, because I was seen as the collection of a number of political hot potatoes.
Gosh.
So it wasn't a military decision. It was a direction that came from the highest office at the time.
Wow. As you say, Kate, it seems unfathomable, doesn't it?
But does it? At the time, to me, it did. But we're in 2025 and you look at what's going on in some of our organisations, at our mine sites. When you look at some of the leaders of some of the most powerful nations of the world.
Yeah.
How many times have you looked around at what's going on, how human rights are being stripped away, how women are being dehumanized, how immigrants are being treated?
Yeah.
And this is 2025. So is it unfathomable, or is it yet another example of the worst of humanity that gets to prosper when the perfect storm and conditions seem to allow them to have dangerously large platforms and give permission to dangerously extreme behaviours?
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
true.
well, we're certainly in a time where a lot of that, perhaps what was once hidden, is not quite so hidden anymore, I think.
No.
Totally. When I think, like you two, I'm a child of the 70s. And when I think about, what we as a immigrant family experienced when we came to Australia, it was nothing compared to the overt racism, sexism, prejudice that you see now.
Yeah.
There's communities that have now been emboldened. And as you said, it is so overt now. I think a lot of it back in the 70s came more from ignorance.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. There seems to be, I think emboldening is the word, right? That what was once perhaps not spoken about overtly, there has been an emboldening of that voice.
No,
I'd love to go back to how you were feeling at that moment when you had to decide whether or not you were going to sue the British government. Talk us through that. I mean, that is, armies are perhaps one of the most hierarchical organisations in the world. The pressure to conform, the rules that everyone has to follow are very, very strong. Talk us through how you were feeling and how you ended up making that decision.
Well, as you can imagine, you don't wake up one morning and go, I reckon I'm going to sue the British government. It took months and months and months to agonise over that. And you can also imagine that was a very lonely journey, because by this point I'd now been put on what the military affectionately referred to as gardening leave, which is when, you're a problem child and they don't know what else to do. So they just send you away almost to Siberia, so that you can't be around to influence people. And it also became career suicide for anyone to be associated with me. So people that were colleagues and also friends disappeared, vanished. So it became very much a lonely journey. And everything about what was going on and every voice around me, and even one of the voices in my head, said, don't do it. You're going to destroy your career. Don't do it, for goodness sake. But the only way I can describe to you how I felt was that silence felt like complicity. And I knew myself and my fervent commitment to my values, which shaped and informed and drove the decision to be a lawyer, to go to the UK, to become an international humanitarian lawyer, to commission as an army officer. Everything about who I was and what I'd chosen to do would have felt like a lie and a hypocrisy had I not spoken up, had I not taken this rather extreme decision to hold the armed forces and the government to account. And I guess it was in that moment that I stopped allowing myself to be silenced and paralyzed and ruled not only by fear, but defined also by the system. And I made the decision to start living by my own values. And by this time, it had become much bigger than me, because I had this realization that if this is how I was being treated, or mistreated rather, with all of my privileges, I had rank, I had title, I had education, I had a voice, I had influence, and I had resources. So if this is how I was being treated, goodness knows how others were being mistreated and what they were being subjected to. So it had become far bigger than me, and it wasn't about my journey now. It was about me being worthy of my leadership and my privileges and my position, and speaking out and calling out those things that others weren't able to do. You know, the whole speaking truth to power, because if not me, then who? So it then became a bigger and beyond me mission.
And were there moments when you were in the middle of that where you just felt pretty lost? Like it went on for a long time, didn't it?
Totally. You know, courage for me, you know, people have said to me over the years, oh, you're so brave, you're so courageous. Gosh, courage on some days for me looked like getting out of bed.
Right. Yeah.
You know, it was a long and tough journey. And the only thing that saw me through was an absolute conviction that I was doing right, and not just doing the right thing by me, but the right thing by others, and holding true to my commitment to live and to lead with my values. Win or lose, I knew this is what I had to do, because I couldn't look myself in the mirror if I didn't. But wow, there were some difficult days. And it did come at huge personal cost.
Right.
You know, I suffered from and I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress. And the psychiatrist that confirmed my diagnosis made it very clear to me, and made it very clear in his report to the armed forces, that my post-traumatic stress did not arise as a result of my mistreatment in the cell in Iraq. It resulted from the horrific impact of injustice and mistreated by those that I trusted.
Yeah. I mean, trauma often makes people turn in on themselves, right? And be silenced and not be able to find the strength necessarily to voice all of that. What is it maybe about you or about your experiences you think that has really made you go the other way? And I think then use this platform that you've now built to be able to talk about what you've learned and what you've experienced in a way that inspires others.
That's a really good question. I think for me, the realization was that silence keeps us trapped in shame and keeps us trapped by fear. And I didn't survive what I survived in order to just stay silent. And I guess I realized that my story wasn't just mine. It was a mirror for so many others that had been silenced or underestimated.
Yeah.
And so I guess for me, sharing my story turned pain into purpose, because what I hoped was that it would help others see that their vulnerability is a source of strength, not weakness, which many of us are conditioned to believe.
So thinking about, well, our outlaws is, people kind of bending the rules, breaking the rules even, and ditching the shoulds. What
Yeah.
is a rule that you think more people should break?
That success requires perfection and conformity.
Mm.
I think we should all break that rule that says that you have to fit in to belong. I don't believe the world needs more polished people. I think the world needs more real ones.
Agree 100%.
Mm, mm,
And I
yeah.
think, that's why Kate and I love doing this podcast, is because we
Mm,
get to chat to people about sort of what really happened, and we really appreciate your honesty about some of those difficult moments, because people just see polish, right? They just see
yeah.
polish and they assume that everything's going okay for everyone else, but it never is. There's
Yeah.
always a story
No,
underneath.
that's right. We are raised and we are conditioned, and many of us come from cultures and families where we are taught to put our best face forward. And
Mm,
no matter what is
Right.
happening beneath the surface, as we said, to show strength and to show calm and to show
mm,
order and to show polish.
yeah.
And I don't think it serves us or others well.
I think, people are not going to find themselves in hostage situations on a
No,
day-to-day
Might feel
basis.
like it, but it's not.
There's
I
a
really hope not.
Yeah,
I
right.
just say, "Okay, it might
Well,
feel like
we
it."
laugh. We
No.
laugh. Of course, I really hope not. But I do believe that you don't have to be held in a cell in a war zone to be held hostage, because I
Yeah.
think that we hold ourselves captive
Mm,
all the time
Right.
by the stories we tell ourselves, by the perceptions we have of ourselves and of others, by what others tell us about ourselves that we take on and we believe that aren't serving, that don't serve us well.
mm,
So, I think being held hostage can take many
yeah.
forms.
Yeah,
Right.
no, I agree,
Yeah.
and that was
Yeah.
exactly the point I was gonna make, that I think there's so much, for people to take out of that story, even though
Mm,
they might not literally be in a hostage situation. There are so many situations in life where we've just got to push back and go,
mm.
yeah, I'm not going to follow that rule. That doesn't feel
Yeah,
right to me, and really go with that gut feeling and do what feels right. So thank you so much for coming on
absolutely.
and sharing that journey with us. That incredible story.
My pleasure. Can I just say one more thing? That is this, that you don't go through something significant in your life that you learn from, that you might take action and you might impact change from, and then you tie that in a neat box and ribbon and say, I am now wiser, stronger, um, and set for life. Because the work that we do is constant and ever
Mm,
evolving, right? And we are all works in progress, I think,
right.
until we draw our last breath. So I want to
Yeah.
make it really clear, because we are talking about, the masks coming off and being real, that for me did not maketh the woman. Life has thrown a number of curveballs, and I have fallen and I have failed, and I have had many more lessons to learn.
I'm really struck as you're talking to Rabia. I think it's Viktor Frankl. We've talked about the man's search for meaning
I
before.
love Viktor Frankl.
Right. But that notion that we can't always control what happens to us, but we can control what we do in response, or how we choose to act
Totally.
in response. And I think that's very much coming through in your story as well, that a lot of these events were not within your control, but what you chose to do
Mm.
has affected real change as a result.
Yeah.
And like you
Yeah, I've
say,
been
we're
fortunate.
works in progress though, aren't we? One big thing happens if we're lucky, we've got the right support around us, we've got the right resolve, resilience, we can learn from it. But that doesn't mean
Mm.
there's not another mountain over the horizon, right? That's just
Mm,
life.
yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I do believe that growth comes from discomfort. There's no shortcut.
Even
Yeah.
though it's uncomfortable, as we know. And as
So
we have
true.
t-shirts to prove, don't we, Shayla?
We
A
do. Yeah.
discomfort is at the very least it's uncomfortable, but it is
Yeah.
ultimately. And I always feel too, no one gets out of life alive, quite literally
Mm,
No,
anyway.
that's right.
But we've all got our things that will be sent to test us to.
Totally. And it comes down to that whole, that beautiful Mandela quote, that courage isn't the absence of fear.
yeah.
It's the ability to face it and to go on anyway.
Mm.
And I
Mm,
think, if we can face our fears and summons up the courage to make those tough decisions anyway, to change the course of our lives and to do things that aren't conforming, in order to be true to ourselves. I think that is the key to finding true peace and joy.
Yeah.
To thine
Yeah.
own self be true, right? This is
Right.
what it's all about.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So we will pop in the show notes the link to Rabia's book if you'd like to read the whole story in much more detail, and all of the links to contact Rabia if you want to. Thank you so much for joining us again, Rabia. It was
You're
great to
welcome.
hear from you.
Thank you so much.
It was an honour. Thank you. And keep doing what you're both doing. It's so important. And I know that it's really impacting on people in the best possible way. So thank you too.
Thank you very much.
Wow. Well, that's a big story, isn't it? It's
It
like,
really
and I
is.
think it's, but I still think, yes, very few of us are going to find ourselves in the situation that Rabia found herself in. Not directly translatable, and yet it is, isn't it? Because I think that we will find ourselves in situations that we didn't choose, but we can
Well, and I
choose
think
to.
often with careers, how often do you feel people say, like, they feel stuck? They're stuck
Right.
in careers. And so
Yeah.
I think the analogy that she used, that you can often feel like you're a hostage in a particular
Right.
situation,
Right.
perhaps of your own making sometime, or
Mm,
of the system's
mm,
making, or of society's making, but
mm.
still you can very much feel like you're a
Yeah.
hostage. I certainly felt
Right.
like I'd created a life for myself that I was a hostage to.
Yeah.
So, I think there's just so many learnings there,
Yeah. And
that everyone.
you can do things, and I think the other thing too is you can make changes. Those changes may be incredibly uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Rabia said that, when she decided to pursue this path, everyone disappeared. So it was very lonely. It wasn't an easy
Mm,
decision.
no.
And even when you know it's right, it doesn't necessarily mean that's the end of the difficulty, right?
Yeah.
I
You've
think
gotta
we
sit
tend to
in that.
think that, don't we?
Yeah.
Oh, well, if I just follow my heart, then, or I do the right thing, then there'll be rainbows and, well,
Mm,
I'd want rainbows and puppies. Some people might want rainbows and unicorns. Hey, whatever.
yeah.
But that's not necessarily how it's going to be. And it's not necessarily one big drama, one big sort of situation isn't necessarily the end of it, but good can come from the choices that you make.
Yeah. No, great story. So we'll pop
Mm.
all the links in the show notes. Great book. So we'd recommend to everyone to
Yeah,
have a read of Rabia's book, and you can follow
or
her on
just
all the socials. And as usual, please let us know if you've enjoyed this episode. Kate and I have got into a discussion about how long episodes should be. So we'd also like to know how long you think episodes should be. Do you like them when they're short? Do you like them when they're long?
do you
So
not
let us
care?
know.
Do you
Or do you
just
not
think
care?
I'm gonna listen to that because that sounds interesting.
So yeah, drop us a line,
Yeah.
contact@outlawspodcast.com, or
Mm.
message us on any of the socials. Thanks, Kate. Have a great week.
Yeah, you too. Thanks, Shayla.
Bye.
Bye.